The rust-eaten shell of a 1970s pickup truck sagged on cinder blocks, its shattered windshield grinning like a skull. Beyond it, a sea of decay stretched across 10 acres of blighted Maryland soil, pyramids of rotting tires, mountains of crushed appliances, and the skeletal remains of 1,000 forgotten machines bleeding oxidized red into the dirt. In the center of this metallic graveyard sat a small, clapboard shack with a caved-in porch, and on that porch sat Jack. To anyone else, the inherited property was a tetanus-filled nightmare, a worthless burden he was too broken to even sell. But his companion, an aging German shepherd named Kai with eyes that held the wisdom of 1,000 loyal lifetimes, knew something else. For weeks, the dog had been obsessed, whining and digging with a frantic energy near the corroded chassis of a vintage Airstream trailer. A strange, compulsive behavior that was the first clue to a $180 million secret buried with the dead. A secret that would force Jack to confront the ghosts he came here to escape or get him killed trying. We pour our hearts into these stories of redemption and loyalty, and if they resonate with you, please consider supporting our channel by hitting that subscribe button. It truly helps us continue to bring these narratives to light. And for everyone listening, we'd be honored to know where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below and let us know what city or country you're in. The silence of the junkyard was a heavy blanket Jack pulled over himself each day. It was a silence filled not with peace, but with the ringing echo of an explosion that had torn his world apart 3 years ago on a dusty road in Kandahar. He had inherited this place, along with the dog, from Leo, his best friend, his brother in all but blood. Leo's will had been a cruel joke only he would have found funny. To Jack, I leave my greatest mess and my best friend. One will help you clean up the other. At the time, Jack hadn't understood. Now, surrounded by the physical manifestation of his own shattered interior, he felt the crushing weight of the punchline. His days were a monotonous ritual of neglect. He'd wake when the nightmares receded, the image of Leo's smile dissolving into smoke and fire, and reach for the bottle of cheap whiskey on the floor. It didn't kill the memories, but it blurred their sharp edges, turning the stabbing pain into a dull, manageable ache. He and the junkyard were in a race to the bottom, both succumbing to a slow, inexorable decay. Kai was the only living thing that refused to let him disintegrate completely. The shepherd, whose once black muzzle was now a noble gray, was a constant, grounding presence. He was Leo's dog, a living, breathing piece of the past Jack couldn't bring himself to discard. Kai had watched him descend into this abyss with a patient, sorrowful gaze. But today, the dog's patience had finally run out. As Jack's hand closed around the neck of the whiskey bottle, a low growl rumbled in Kai's chest. Before Jack could lift it, the dog moved with a speed that belied his age, nudging Jack's arm with his head, a firm, insistent bump that sent the bottle skittering across the grimy floorboards. Jack stared at the spreading amber stain, then at the dog. "What's your problem, boy?" he mumbled, his voice thick with disuse. Kai didn't bark. He just stared back, his intelligent brown eyes holding Jack's. And then he whined, a soft, pleading sound that cut through the alcoholic fog. He nudged Jack's hand, this time with a gentle lick, then turned and walked to the door, looking back over his shoulder. It was an invitation, an order. With a sigh that seemed to drain the last of his energy, Jack pushed himself to his feet. His joints protested, his head pounded, but the dog's expectation was a hook he couldn't shake. He followed Kai out of the shack, squinting against the harsh afternoon sun glinting off a million broken surfaces. The dog didn't wander. He moved with purpose, his gait stiff but determined, leading Jack past a teetering stack of rusted engine blocks and a defunct cement mixer. His destination was the Airstream, a once proud vessel of the open road now grounded and listing, its aluminum skin pockmarked and dull. Kai went straight to a spot near the front axle, where the earth was already disturbed from his previous efforts, and began to dig again, paws sending clumps of dirt flying. He'd stop, look at Jack, and let out a short, sharp bark. "There's nothing there, Kai," Jack said, his voice flat. "It's just dirt. It's all just junk." But the dog was relentless. He dug, he whined, he barked, he stared. It was a singular, focused mission. There was an intelligence in his insistence that Jack couldn't dismiss as simple animal instinct. This was communication. Annoyance warred with a flicker of curiosity. It was something to do. It was a reason to be outside, to move, to not be sitting on that porch staring into the bottom of a glass. "All right," Jack sighed, running a hand over his tired face. "Fine. You win." He trudged back towards the shack to find a shovel, the simple act of choosing a tool feeling strangely monumental. He was engaging, participating, answering the call of the only voice that had managed to reach him in his self-imposed exile. He was, for the first time in a long time, choosing to do something other than fade away. The task was Herculean. The airstream was hemmed in by decades of metallic detritus. To get a clear space to work, Jack had to move a wall of corroded oil drums, a tangle of rebar that looked like petrified spaghetti, and the hood of a Studebaker. The labor was punishing. His muscles, softened by inactivity and alcohol, screamed in protest. Sweat poured down his face, stinging his eyes and carving clean tracks through the grime on his skin. Yet, with every piece of junk he heaved aside, a small, tight knot in his chest seemed to loosen. The physical strain was a clean pain, an honest exhaustion that left no room for the ghosts. It was just him, the steel, and the sun. Kai stayed close, a silent supervisor, his tail giving a slow, steady thump against the ground whenever Jack cleared another significant piece of debris. The dog's focus remained unwavering, his gaze fixed on the underbelly of the trailer. After 2 days of relentless work, Jack had cleared a 10-foot circle around the airstream. He was sore, blistered, but he was also sober. He hadn't had a drink since Kai had knocked the bottle from his hand. He hadn't even thought about it. Now he could finally get a good look at the spot that had so captivated his canine companion. He lay on his back in the dirt, the smell of rust and dry earth filling his nostrils, and slid under the trailer. It was a dark, claustrophobic world of axles and pipes. And right where Kai had been digging, there was a small, rectangular panel on the insulated underbelly. It was almost perfectly flush, the seams disguised by dirt and corrosion. Without the dog's pinpoint obsession, he would never have noticed it. It wasn't a standard access hatch. It was custom, a secret. Using the claw of a hammer and a heavy-duty screwdriver, Jack began to work at the edges. The screws were rusted tight, fused to the frame. It took an hour of grunting, cursing, and leveraging his weight against the tools before he felt the first one give with a sharp crack. One by one, he broke them free, until the panel came loose in his hands. He tossed it aside and reached into the dark cavity. His fingers brushed against cold, hard steel. He gripped it and pulled. It was heavy, far heavier than its size suggested. He slid it out into the daylight. It was a steel box, about the size of a large book, its seams sealed with a thick, precise weld. Jack sat up, wiping the sweat from his brow with the back of a dirty glove, and stared at the object in his hands. Kai padded over and sat beside him, resting his head on Jack's knee as if to say, "See? I told you." A strange feeling washed over Jack, a mix of trepidation and something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. This box was placed here deliberately, hidden with intent. He ran his thumb over the weld. The pattern was clean, efficient, overlapping beads laid down with a steady hand. He knew this weld. He had seen it 100 times on jury-rigged equipment mounts and field repairs in the FOB. It was Leo's signature. A lump formed in his throat. This wasn't just a random discovery. This was a message from the grave, left for him by the man whose absence was a hole in the center of his universe. The weight of the box in his lap was no longer just physical. It was the weight of a past he had tried to bury, now unearthed and demanding his attention. Jack carried the steel box back to the shack as if it were a holy relic. The familiar squalor of the room, the dusty surfaces, the empty bottles he hadn't yet cleared away, seemed to recede, the space now consecrated by the object on the table. He set it down gently. For a moment he just looked at it, his mind racing. Why would Leo hide this? And why here? Leo had always been the planner, the strategist, the one who saw 10 moves ahead on the chessboard of life. Even his pranks were elaborate, multi-layered affairs. This was no different. Jack went to the dilapidated workshop, a cavernous outbuilding filled with more ghosts and forgotten projects. He found an old angle grinder, its orange casing caked in grease. He blew the dust off it, fitted a new cutting wheel, and carried it back. The high-pitched scream of the grinder filled the small shack, a violent sound for a delicate operation. Jack worked with a surgeon's precision, his hands steady, his focus absolute. The skills he'd honed defusing IEDs under immense pressure came flooding back. He didn't cut through the box. He carefully ground away Leo's weld, millimeter by millimeter, sparks showering the floor around him. Kai lay by the door, watching, his ears twitching with each fresh shriek of the metal. Finally, with a soft click, the lid came free. Jack switched off the grinder, the sudden silence deafening. He lifted the lid. There was no gold, no cash, no weapons. Inside, nestled in yellowed foam padding, was a thick, leather-bound journal and a single, ornate, strangely shaped key. The key was brass with a complex, gear-like head. The journal was old, its cover worn smooth at the edges. He picked it up, the leather cool against his skin. He opened it to the first page. The handwriting was a familiar, neat script, Leo's. But it wasn't plain English. It was a jumble of letters, a simple substitution cipher they had invented as kids to pass notes in class. A code they called Ghost Talk. A sad smile touched Jack's lips. Of course, only Jack could read this. This was meant only for him. He sat down at the dusty table, pulling a crumpled piece of paper from a drawer and a pencil stub. The first line was ZKLGGCZBH. He started working, his mind slipping into the old, familiar grooves of pattern recognition and logical deduction. Z was probably T. G was probably H. Slowly, painstakingly, the letters began to resolve into words. T.O. my ghost, Leo's nickname for him. The next line, if you are reading this, I'm gone. Don't mourn. Finish the job. A chill went down Jack's spine. This wasn't just a memento. It was a mission. He spent the rest of the day and deep into the night hunched over the journal, the scratch of his pencil the only sound. The first few decoded pages weren't about the war or their shared past. They were about this place. Leo had been researching his family history. The junkyard wasn't just a junkyard. It belonged to his grandfather, a brilliant but eccentric engineer named Elias Vance, who had worked on classified projects after World War II. Elias, Leo wrote, had invented something revolutionary, something that could have changed the world. But he was paranoid, terrified that vultures in suits would steal his life's work. So he hid it. He converted his entire property into a sprawling mechanical puzzle, a fortress of junk, hiding his legacy in plain sight. He built a dragon and then buried it under a mountain of scrap. One line read, "The secret isn't the treasure. The secret is the lock." The journal was the map. The strange key was, well, the key. Jack looked from the journal to the key, then around the shack. His mission was no longer to simply survive his grief. It was to uncover a legacy, to honor his friend's final request. He was no longer just the inheritor of a mess. He was the keeper of a secret. The thought didn't scare him. It anchored him. The weeks that followed were a blur of purposeful labor. Jack's days found a new rhythm, one dictated not by the rising and setting of the sun, but by the tasks laid out in the journal. He rose early, the morning air crisp and tasting of metal and dew. The first order of business was always the junkyard itself. Elias Vance, according to Leo's notes, had organized his fortress with a bizarre logic. What looked like random piles of scrap were actually coded markers and functional components of a larger system. Jack, guided by the decoded passages, began to see the order in the chaos. He wasn't just cleaning, he was excavating. He cleared pathways, sorted materials, copper in one pile, steel in another, aluminum in a third, and uncovered hidden mechanisms. A winch system disguised as a clothesline, a series of levers hidden within the frame of a rusted-out tractor. The junkyard was slowly transforming from a landscape of decay into one of intricate, if dilapidated, design. The physical transformation was mirrored within him. The heavy, shapeless cloak of his grief began to feel lighter, replaced by the satisfying ache of worked muscles and the sharp focus of a puzzle to be solved. He ate regularly, simple meals he cooked on a hot plate, his appetite returning with the exertion. The nightmares still came, but they were less frequent, their hold on him weaker. He was too tired, too engaged, for them to find purchase. His trips into the nearby town of Harmony Creek became more frequent. He needed tools, welding gas, heavy-duty gloves. The hardware store was a small, old-fashioned place run by a woman in her late 60s named Marge. She had kind, crinkling eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. The first time he'd come in, he'd been a ghost himself. Gaunt, unshaven, avoiding eye contact, paying in cash and leaving without a word. Now he was different. The grime on his clothes was from work, not neglect. His shoulders were broader, his gaze direct. Marge noticed. "You're looking better, son," she said one afternoon as she rang up a new set of grinding wheels. "That old Vance place must agree with you." Jack was taken aback by the directness. "It's a lot of work," he replied, his voice still raspy. "Hard work is good for the soul," she said, bagging his items. "My husband used to say sweat is the best way to wash out the bad stuff." She gave him a knowing smile, one that held no pity, only a deep human understanding. It was a small moment, a simple exchange, but it was the first real human connection Jack had made in years. Felt normal, fragile but normal. He became a regular, and their conversations grew from clipped pleasantries to brief discussions about his project. He never revealed the secret, of course, just that he was cleaning the place up. Marge became an unwitting part of his new routine, a link to a world he was slowly, cautiously rejoining. Back at the yard, he continued to decipher the journal. He learned more about Elias Vance, a man who saw conspiracy in every shadow but whose genius was undeniable. The journal spoke of a hidden workshop, the true heart of the property, sealed behind a door with no visible lock. "The entrance isn't opened by a key," Leo had written. "It's opened by a sequence. The yard is the combination." The clues were maddeningly cryptic, tied to the positions of specific pieces of junk and the alignment of shadows at certain times of day. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard, Jack saw it. A shadow from a crookedly placed telephone pole fell directly onto a specific gear in a pile he had recently excavated. He consulted the journal. It was the final piece of the sequence. He followed the instructions, engaging the levers on the old tractor, which in turn pulled a series of hidden cables, causing a section of the workshop's corrugated steel wall to retract with a groan of protest, revealing a heavy, vault-like door. There was no handle, no knob, only a single, complex keyhole that matched the brass key from the box. The puzzle was falling into place. The sleek, black Escalade seemed to absorb the light as it crawled up the rutted, gravel driveway. It was an alien craft in this world of rust and decay, its polished chrome glinting with an almost offensive perfection. It parked a respectful distance from the shack, and a man emerged from the driver's side. He was tall, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than Jack's entire truck. His hair was silver at the temples, his face handsome and tanned, his smile practiced and confident. He radiated an aura of effortless wealth and power. Kai, who had been dozing on the porch, rose to his feet, a low, guttural growl vibrating in his chest. Jack put a calming hand on the dog's back. "Easy, boy," the man approached, his expensive leather shoes navigating the uneven ground with practiced ease. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, his smile widening. "Jack Peterson?" he asked, his voice smooth as silk. Jack didn't answer, just watched him. The man's eyes flickered over the yard, taking in the newly organized piles of scrap, the cleared pathways. It wasn't the dismissive glance of a tourist. It was the quick, appraising scan of an assessor. "My name is Marcus Thorne," the man said, extending a hand. Jack ignored it. "I'm a senior partner with the Sterling Development Group. I'll be honest with you, Mr. Peterson. We've had our eye on this parcel of land for some time. We're planning a major commercial hub here, logistics, retail. It's going to bring a lot of prosperity to this region." Thorne's gaze was direct, charismatic. He was used to getting what he wanted. "Your property," he said, a slight, almost imperceptible hesitation as he chose the word, "is the final piece of the puzzle for us. I know it's an heirloom, but frankly, it's an environmental liability. The cleanup costs alone would be astronomical for a private citizen." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Which is why I'm here. My group has authorized me to make you a very generous, one-time offer. We'll take the land off your hands, as is. We'll assume all responsibility for the cleanup. And we will write you a check for $2 million, the number hung in the air." It was a life-changing amount of money. The old Jack, the one from just a few weeks ago, would have taken it without a second thought. He would have taken the money and vanished, finding a new, cleaner place to drink himself to death. But that Jack was gone, buried under tons of sorted steel and decoded journal entries. He was the keeper of a legacy now. This land wasn't a liability. It was a sanctuary, a puzzle box, a promise to a dead friend. "The property's not for sale," Jack said, his voice level. Thorne's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a tiny crack in the polished facade. He had expected a negotiation, not a flat refusal. "Mr. Peterson, perhaps you don't understand. This is a top-dollar offer. More than fair. It's a chance to walk away from this mess with a fortune." "I understand perfectly," Jack replied, his hands still resting on Kai's powerful shoulders. "My answer is no." Thorne's eyes hardened. The charm evaporated, replaced by a cold, transactional glint. He looked from Jack to Kai to the half-cleared junkyard and then back to Jack. It was a look that said, "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "I see," Thorne said, his voice losing its silken edge. "A man of principle. Or a fool. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference." He turned without another word, got back into his Escalade, and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust and an unnerving sense of menace hanging in the air. Jack watched him go, the low growl still rumbling in Kai's chest. The game had changed. The vultures Elias Vance had feared had finally arrived. 3 days passed in an atmosphere of tense quiet. Jack tried to push Thorne's visit from his mind, focusing instead on the vault door to the hidden workshop. He cleaned the intricate keyhole, oiled the surrounding mechanism, and prepared to finally see what Elias Vance had protected so fiercely. But the feeling of being watched, the shadow of Thorne's visit, lingered. On the morning of the 4th day, he discovered the violation. He walked out to the section of the yard where he'd been painstakingly restoring the engine of an old Ford F-150, a project that was more about reclaiming his own mechanical skills than anything else. The engine block, which he had left gleaming and almost fully assembled, was now a wreck. A sledgehammer had been taken to it, cracking the cast iron, shattering his careful work. Nearby, a neatly stacked pallet of sorted copper pipes had been overturned and scattered. His tools, which he kept meticulously organized on a tarp, were gone. It wasn't random vandalism. It was a surgical strike, aimed at his progress, at his effort. It was a message. Anger, cold and sharp, lanced through him. This was a desecration of his sanctuary, his workspace, his fragile peace. He was scanning the perimeter for tracks when his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was an unknown number. He answered, his jaw tight. "Mr. Peterson." Marcus Thorne. The voice was devoid of any pretense of charm now. It was flat, cold, and dangerous. "I was hoping you'd had some time to reconsider my offer. You've got a hell of a nerve calling me after you sent your goons to trash my property," Jack shot back. There was a soft chuckle on the other end of the line. "Think of it as a market correction, a demonstration of how quickly assets can depreciate. Things break. Things get lost." There was a sinister pause. "It'd be a shame if an old dog got lost in all that junk. They can get stuck in things. Accidents happen." The threat, so casually delivered, landed like a punch to the gut. Jack's vision tunneled. The anger transformed into something else, something primal and fiercely protective. Thorne wasn't just threatening his land anymore. He was threatening Kai. He was threatening the last living link to Leo. He was threatening the one creature that had pulled him back from the brink. The soldier in Jack, the one who had been dormant for 3 years, woke up with a roar. The rules of engagement had just been set. This was no longer a negotiation over real estate. It was a defense of his home, his life, and his loyalty to his friend. "If anything happens to my dog," Jack said, his voice dropping to a low, lethal calm, "I will find you. And when I do, you'll discover that a fool with nothing to lose is the most dangerous man in the world." He ended the call, his hand trembling not with fear, but with adrenaline. He looked over at Kai, who was watching him, head tilted, sensing the shift in his master. The menace was no longer a shadow. It was here, it had a name, and it had made the fatal mistake of threatening the wrong man's dog. Jack knew he couldn't wait any longer. He had to get into that workshop. The answers and possibly his survival were behind that vault door. The threat against Kai lit a fire under Jack. There was no more time for patient exploration. He needed answers, and he needed them now. He strode to the vault door, the brass key feeling heavy and significant in his palm. He inserted it into the complex lock. It slid in with a satisfying, precise click. He turned it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, deep within the wall, a series of heavy tumblers began to shift with a sound like the grinding of tectonic plates. With a final, deep thud, a hiss of depressurizing air escaped around the door's edges. Jack gripped the edge and pulled. The door, impossibly heavy, swung inward on silent, perfectly balanced hinges, revealing a cavern of darkness. A switch was just inside the frame. He flicked it. A string of bare, industrial bulbs flickered to life, illuminating a space that was part laboratory, part machine shop, and part time capsule. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust but was otherwise perfectly preserved. There were lathes, drill presses, and strange, esoteric pieces of equipment Jack couldn't identify. Blueprints were tacked to the walls, filled with elegant, complex designs. At the center of the room, on a large workbench, sat a heavy-duty metal briefcase. It was the only thing in the room that seemed out of place, more modern than the surrounding 1950s-era technology. It had a single lock, but not one for a normal key. It had a custom receptacle that perfectly matched the strange, gear-like head of the brass key. The key wasn't for the door. It was for this. With his heart pounding, Jack fitted the key into the briefcase's lock and turned it. With a soft snick, it opened. He lifted the lid, expecting he didn't know what. Gold? Bonds? What he found was far more valuable and far more terrifying. The briefcase was filled with documents. Schematics, patent filings, and corporate paperwork. The schematics were for a revolutionary drone guidance and counterjamming system. It was decades ahead of its time, a design of pure genius. The patent was filed under the name Elias Vance. But tucked beneath the patent was another set of files, newer and more sinister. They were procurement contracts, internal memos, and field incident reports from a defense contractor called Aegis Secure Comms. Jack's blood ran cold. He knew that name. Aegis was the company that had supplied the encrypted communication gear for his unit's final, fatal mission. The gear that had failed at the critical moment, cutting them off from air support and leaving them blind in the middle of an ambush. The failure that had gotten Leo killed. He frantically sifted through the papers, his hands starting to shake. He found the specific incident report for his unit. It was heavily redacted, but the notes scrawled in the margins, in Leo's handwriting, told the real story. System failure due to substandard components. Known issue. Covered up, and then he found the document that connected everything, the final, devastating piece of the puzzle. It was a set of incorporation papers showing that Aegis Secure Comms had been quietly acquired and absorbed by a larger parent company just 2 months after the incident. The acquisition had effectively buried Aegis and all its liabilities, including any pending investigations into its faulty equipment. The name of the parent company was the Sterling Development Group, and the signature at the bottom of the acquisition paperwork, the name of the CEO who had personally overseen the deal, was Marcus Thorne. The breath left Jack's body in a ragged gasp. It all crashed down on him with the force of a physical blow. Thorne hadn't just stumbled upon this land. He knew what was here. He had likely stolen Elias Vance's technology, built his fortune on a corrupted version of it, and then sold it back to the military. Leo, a communications specialist, must have started investigating the persistent gear failures. He must have connected it back to his own grandfather's stolen work. He must have been getting close to exposing Thorn. Leo's death wasn't a tragic accident of war. It was a convenient, profitable outcome for Marcus Thorn. The $180 million secret wasn't just the value of the patent. It was the price of Thorn's empire, built on theft, lies, and the blood of soldiers like Leo. The wound Jack had carried for 3 years, the raw, gaping hole of his grief, suddenly fused with the stakes of his current fight. This wasn't about land or money anymore. It was about justice for his friend. The junkyard wasn't just a puzzle box. It was a crime scene, and Thorn was coming back to bury the evidence for good. The wave of grief that crashed over Jack was different this time. It wasn't the numb, resigned sorrow of the past 3 years. It was a hot, focused rage, a grief sharpened to a razor's edge by the truth. His first, overwhelming impulse was animalistic. He wanted to find Thorn and tear him apart with his bare hands. He wanted to make him pay for Leo, for the cover-up, for the sheer, arrogant evil of it all. He paced the workshop like a caged tiger, his fists clenching and unclenching. The briefcase of evidence felt like it was burning a hole in the workbench. He could go to the authorities, but what then? Thorn was a master of manipulation, a man who buried corporations to hide his tracks. It would be a war of lawyers and paperwork, and Thorn would have an army. The man would tie it up in court for years, and justice would be delayed, diluted, and ultimately denied. He looked at Kai, who had followed him into the workshop and now sat watching him, his head cocked with concern. The dog was Leo's last gift, a living reminder of his friend's loyalty and goodness. If Jack gave in to his rage, if he became a killer, he would be desecrating Leo's memory, becoming the very thing they had fought against. He would be choosing vengeance over justice. And in that moment, looking into the dog's steady, knowing eyes, he made his choice. He would not run. He would not be a vigilante. He would be a soldier again. He would defend this ground, protect this evidence, and he would use Thorn's own arrogance against him. He knew Thorn would be back, and he wouldn't be bringing a checkbook this time. He would come to take the briefcase and silence the only person who could connect him to it. He would come expecting to find a broken-down veteran in a junkyard. He would not be prepared for what he was going to find instead. Jack's mind, once clouded with grief, was now crystal clear, operating with the cold, tactical precision he hadn't accessed in years. He had the terrain advantage. He had the element of surprise. And he had a junkyard full of resources. He spent the next 48 hours in a fever of controlled activity. He was no longer a man restoring a property. He was a combat engineer preparing a battlefield. He hauled jagged sheets of metal and the chassis of old cars into place, creating a labyrinth of choke points and dead ends in the outer yard. He scavenged solenoids, batteries, and motion sensors from old security systems, wiring them to a series of alarms, loud, clanging bells, and repurposed truck horns that he could activate from a central point in the workshop. He wasn't just setting traps. He was shaping the battlefield, designing it to confuse, separate, and demoralize his enemy. His piece de resistance was in the main workshop, the place he knew Thorn would ultimately come for. He positioned an old, massive hydraulic press near the entrance. He welded a frame above it and attached a heavy cargo net woven from steel cable. Using a complex system of pulleys and a counterweight, he rigged it so that a single, well-placed kick to a release lever would drop the net with unstoppable force. It was non-lethal, but decisive. He worked through the day and night, powered by coffee and a grim sense of purpose. He was turning his sanctuary of healing into a fortress. Every piece of junk he moved, every wire he connected, was an act of defiance, a tribute to Leo. He was using the skills that the military had taught him, the very skills that had been a source of his trauma, as the tools of his redemption. As he made his final preparations, he knelt and looked Kai in the eyes. "All right, boy," he said softly, his voice steady. "You know the drill. When the time comes, you go to the spot I showed you. You stay quiet. You stay hidden. No matter what you hear. Understand?" Kai whined softly and licked his hand, his gaze unwavering. He understood. Jack was ready. The broken man was gone. The soldier was back. And he was waiting. The storm rolled in just after midnight, a fitting accomplice to the violence that was coming. Rain lashed against the metal roof of the workshop, and wind howled through the canyons of junk, providing a perfect acoustic cover for an assault. Jack sat in the darkness of the workshop, watching a small, grainy monitor he had wired to a series of low-light cameras he'd salvaged and hidden around the property. Kai was a silent shadow at his feet. At 2:17, a pair of headlights appeared at the end of the driveway, then went dark. They were here. The camera feed showed 3 figures getting out of a dark van, clad in black, moving with practiced efficiency. One was Thorn, directing the other 2 who were clearly hired muscle. They carried bolt cutters and what looked like suppressed firearms. They cut the chain on the main gate and moved onto the property, fanning out. Their first mistake. "Welcome to the scrap heap," Jack whispered into the darkness. He flipped a switch. The main power line to the property, which they had likely assumed they would cut, was a decoy. He had been running everything off a muffled generator hidden in a soundproofed container. Thorn's men moved with confidence, using flashlights with tactical discipline. They were professionals, but they were in his world now. The first man entered a narrow channel between 2 towering stacks of crushed cars. He tripped a wire low to the ground. It wasn't an explosion. It was something far more unnerving. From the darkness above, a dozen empty propane tanks, strung together on a cable, came crashing down around him with a deafening, metallic roar. The man yelled in shock, stumbling back, his light flailing wildly. He was disoriented, his hearing compromised. Thorn's voice crackled over a radio, angry and sharp. The second thug moved to flank the noise, heading toward the old cement mixer. As he passed it, Jack hit another switch. A powerful electromagnet, pulled from a scrap crane and wired to a bank of car batteries, energized. The man's rifle was ripped from his hands, flying through the air and slamming against the side of the mixer with a loud clang. He stared at his empty hands in disbelief, momentarily paralyzed by confusion. One disoriented, one disarmed. Now there was just Thorn. Jack watched on the monitor as Thorn, furious and impatient, abandoned caution and made a direct line for the workshop. He knew what he was here for. Jack killed the monitor and melted back into the deeper shadows of the shop, his heart hammering a steady, controlled rhythm. The vault door was open, an invitation. Thorn entered, his weapon raised, sweeping the room with the beam of his flashlight. "Peterson," he snarled. "Enough games. Give me the briefcase and I might let you live." The beam passed over Jack's position, but he remained perfectly still, a ghost in the clutter. Thorn moved toward the workbench where the briefcase sat. He was so close. He reached for it, his back momentarily turned. Jack moved. He wasn't a brawler, he was a soldier. He closed the distance in 2 silent steps, striking Thorn's gun arm at the elbow joint. A sharp, precise blow that sent a shock of pain up to the man's shoulder. The gun clattered to the floor. But Thorn was bigger, heavier. He roared in pain and rage, swinging a powerful backhand that caught Jack across the face, sending him stumbling backward. Thorn lunged, tackling Jack to the ground. He was a brute, all fury and strength, his expensive suit now torn and grimy. He pinned Jack, his hands closing around his throat. "You should have taken the money," he spat, his face inches from Jack's, his eyes wild. Jack's vision began to swim, black spots dancing at the edges. He was losing. He had underestimated Thorn's raw ferocity. As Thorn squeezed harder, a new sound cut through the roar of the storm. A sound that wasn't part of Jack's plan. It was a low, terrifying growl that seemed to come from the very shadows themselves. Thorn's eyes widened in confusion for a split second. It was all the time Kai needed. A black and tan blur of righteous fury launched itself from under a workbench where he had been hiding, a silent specter of loyalty unleashed. Kai didn't bark. He didn't nip. He hit Thorn's side like a furry cannonball, all 90 pounds of muscle and bone and teeth, driving the bigger man sideways off of Jack. Thorn cried out in pain and surprise as he crashed into a rack of tools. The gun lay on the floor between them. As Thorn scrambled for it, Jack kicked out, sending it skittering into the darkness. He lurched to his feet, gasping for air, and kicked the release lever for his trap. With a loud swoosh, the heavy steel net dropped from the ceiling, enveloping the stunned and struggling Thorn. He was caught, tangled in the steel mesh, disarmed and defeated. Jack stood over him, breathing heavily. As Kai planted his front paws, a deep, unwavering growl rumbling in his chest. His eyes locked on the captured man. The hero of the hour wasn't a clever trap or a soldier's skill. It was a loyal dog who had broken the rules to save his master. The flashing blue and red lights painted the junkyard in surreal, pulsing colors, cutting through the pre-dawn gloom. Sheriff Brody, a man whose previous encounters with the Vance property had involved ticketing for illegal dumping, looked from the net-ensnared Marcus Thorn to the briefcase full of incriminating documents, and then to Jack, who stood calmly with a hand on Kai's head. Marge, from the hardware store, had done exactly as Jack had asked in a hushed phone call 2 days prior. If she saw a sequence of 3 flashing lights from his property, she was to call the sheriff and report a break-in, no questions asked. Her call had brought the law to Thorn's doorstep at the perfect moment. Thorn's blustering threats and claims of trespassing quickly crumbled in the face of the evidence. The briefcase was the prosecutor's dream. The patent documents, the Aegis contracts, and Leo's handwritten notes laid out a damning narrative of corporate theft, fraud, and a criminal cover-up that had led to the deaths of American soldiers. Thorn's empire, built on a foundation of lies, began to collapse before the sun even rose. The story became a national sensation. The tale of a reclusive veteran and his loyal dog uncovering a massive defense contracting scandal was irresistible. Investigators, armed with the contents of the briefcase, unraveled Thorn's web of corruption. Other faulty equipment contracts came to light. Other incidents were re-examined. The name of Leo Vance, once just another name on a memorial wall, was now celebrated as that of a hero who had been fighting for the truth until his very last day. The original patent for the drone guidance system, filed by Elias Vance all those years ago, was legally restored to Leo's estate, with Jack as its sole executor. Financial experts, valuing its potential applications in both the commercial and defense sectors, appraised it at a staggering $180 million. The money, the fame, the endless requests for interviews, none of it touched Jack. He stayed at the junkyard, the world held at bay by the long gravel driveway. He had found what he was looking for, and it wasn't wealth. It was peace. It was justice for Leo. With the vast resources now at his command, he didn't buy a yacht or a mansion. He established the Leo's Watch Foundation. Its mission was twofold. First, it provided immediate and comprehensive support for the families of soldiers who had fallen due to equipment failure or corporate negligence. Second, it funded an independent research and development wing, using the restored Vance patent as its technological cornerstone, dedicated to creating safer, more reliable equipment for the men and women still in uniform. Jack had brought his friend's mission to its ultimate conclusion. The junkyard was finally cleared. The last vestiges of decay were hauled away, revealing the good earth beneath. But Jack didn't sell. He kept the small, rebuilt shack and the now pristine workshop. He planted grass, and where the mountains of rust had once stood, a green field now rolled. It was no longer a prison or a fortress. It was a home. In the evenings he would sit on the new porch, a cup of coffee in his hand, and watch the sunset paint the sky. Kai, his muzzle now almost entirely white, would rest his head on Jack's lap, his breathing slow and content. They had faced the ghosts of the past together and had won. The silence was different now. It was a true peace, earned and profound, filled not with the echoes of explosions, but with the quiet hum of a life rebuilt, a legacy honored, and a loyalty that had proven stronger than death itself. The bond between a person and a loyal animal can be one of the most powerful forces on earth. It's a connection that asks for nothing but gives everything, a silent promise that you are never truly alone. Jack's story is a testament to that truth, a reminder that sometimes the path back to the light is illuminated not by grand ambition, but by the simple, unwavering devotion of a friend who refuses to let you go. Healing isn't about forgetting the past. It's about rebuilding a future strong enough to hold its weight, piece by painful piece, until what was once a junkyard of sorrow becomes a field of peace. Thank you for joining us for this story. Your time and attention mean the world to us. If this story touched you, we would be so grateful if you would like, share, and subscribe to our channel. And please, leave a comment below. We read every single one. Did a particular moment in Jack and Kai's journey resonate with you? Let us know. We have another story of hope and resilience coming next week, and we can't wait to share it with you. Until then, be well.